She begged God for a son. For years, nothing happened. No answer, no child, just silence. And then one day, he gave her exactly what she asked for. A son. The one thing she had cried for, prayed for, built her entire hope around. And she gave him back. Not later. Not when he was grown. She walked him to the temple as a child and left him there. This isn't a story about getting what you want. It's about what it costs when you finally do. Because the part nobody talks about isn't the prayer. It's what she promised God before he ever answered it. You have to understand the world she existed in. No privacy, not even the concept of it. In ancient Israel, the household was the entire world. 1 or 2 rooms, family, livestock, grain storage, all of it in close proximity. There was no place to cry without being heard, no place to grieve without being seen. In that world, a woman's worth was tied directly to her ability to bear children. This is not opinion. This is structural fact. Children were labor. Children were security. Children were how your name continued. A woman who could not bear them was not just personally heartbroken. She was socially diminished. People assumed God had closed her womb as judgment. The whispers did not require evidence. The assumption was built into the culture. Hannah felt every day of this, and she felt it while living under the same roof as a woman who made sure she never forgot it. Elkanah had 2 wives. The other one was named Peninnah, and Peninnah had children. The text does not tell us how many. It only tells us what she did with them. She used them as a weapon. 1 Samuel 1:6 says she provoked Hannah severely to irritate her year after year because the Lord had closed Hannah's womb. Year after year. This was not a one-time confrontation. This was a sustained campaign. Every meal, every festival, every trip to the temple. Peninnah knew exactly which nerve to find, and she pressed it. Now consider what Hannah could not do. She could not leave. Divorce in ancient Israel was a male right. She could not appeal to Elkanah's fairness. He loved her, and even that was complicated because his love was not enough to fix what she carried. He would ask her, "Am I not better to you than 10 sons?" And the answer, which Hannah was too kind to say out loud, was, "You are not the same thing at all." She could not silence Peninnah. She could not pray the pain away. She had been praying. That was the whole problem. She could only absorb it, year after year, until the year she couldn't anymore. There is a year in every long season of unanswered prayer where something shifts, not toward hope, toward the end of the rope. The Bible does not tell us which year it was for Hannah. It only tells us what that year looked like. She wept. She would not eat. She got up from the meal, from the festival table, from Elkanah's double portion given in love, and she walked to the entrance of the temple. And she knelt down, and she began to pray. Notice what the text says carefully. Her lips were moving, but her voice was silent. This was not a composed prayer. This was not the kind of prayer you write down and practice. This was something that came from a place too deep for full sentences, too raw for public words. She was speaking to God in a register that had no volume, only weight. And in that prayer, she made a vow. She said, "If you give me a son, I will give him back. He will serve you for the rest of his life. No razor will touch his head." Think carefully about what she just offered. She wanted a child so desperately she had stopped eating. She had been humiliated in front of her household for years. She was weeping at the threshold of the temple. And her offer, the thing she was willing to trade, was the very thing she was asking for. That is not desperation. That is faith with open hands. While Hannah was praying this silent, anguished, lip-moving prayer, someone was watching her. Eli, the high priest. He was sitting at the doorpost of the tabernacle, and from where he sat, he saw a woman whose body was shaking, whose lips were moving without sound, whose face was soaked and raw. And he made an assumption. He walked over and told her to put away her wine, to stop making a scene, to sober up. Sit inside that for a moment. You are at the lowest point of your emotional life. You have been carrying a grief for years that no one fully sees. You finally break open before God, honestly, completely, with no performance and no filter. You are on your knees at the house of God, and the man of God tells you that you're drunk. What Hannah did next is one of the most quietly remarkable moments in the entire Old Testament. She did not collapse. She did not apologize. She did not leave. She looked at the high priest and she corrected him, calmly, respectfully. But she corrected him. She said, "I am a woman deeply troubled. I have not been drinking. I have been pouring out my soul before the Lord. Do not regard me as a worthless woman. I have been speaking out of my great anxiety and grief." She named what she was doing, pouring out my soul. She didn't apologize for the rawness. She didn't dress the prayer up to make it more acceptable. She simply told him the truth about what he had walked into. And then something shifted in Eli. He saw her. Eli looked at her again, not as a drunk woman, as a woman in pain. And he said, "Go in peace. May the God of Israel grant the petition you have made to him." Nothing had changed. Her womb was still closed. Peninnah was still at home. The years of silence were still behind her. But the Bible says she went away and ate, and her face was no longer sad. Read that again. Her face was no longer sad. Before the answer, before the pregnancy, before anything visible shifted, she had peace. This is one of the hardest and most important things this story teaches us. Peace does not always follow the answer. Sometimes it follows the surrender. She had prayed everything she had. She had been honest before God and honest before the priest. She had said out loud, in the only way she knew how, what she needed. And something in her settled, not because the prayer was answered, because she had truly given it away. Set aside the theology for a moment. Just think about the body. In the ancient world, there was no category for infertility as a medical condition. There was no treatment. There was no explanation offered except the theological one. God has closed her womb. That phrase appears in the text as simple fact. It was how the culture understood it. And that meant that Hannah's body was not just a source of personal grief. It was publicly readable as evidence of divine judgment. She had no way to challenge that reading. She could not go to a clinic. There were no hormone tests, no scans, no alternative explanations to offer the people watching her. Every month was a private grief with a public interpretation she had no power to correct. And layered over every physical fact was the emotional architecture of living in a household where another woman's fertility was used as a daily weapon against her. She was not exempt from the grief. She was inside it completely. Every feast, every offering, every year. She carried this in her body the way every unanswered prayer eventually lives in the body, as weight, as exhaustion, as the specific ache of wanting something that will not come. The morning after that prayer at the temple, Hannah and Elkanah worshiped together and then returned home to Ramah. And the Lord remembered her. 4 words. Do not rush past them. In the language of the Hebrew Scriptures, when God remembers someone, it is not a statement about forgetting. God does not forget. When God remembers, It means the time has come. It means the waiting season is ending and the acting season is beginning. The Lord remembered her. In due time, Hannah conceived and bore a son, and she named him Samuel, because, she said, I asked for him from the Lord. Samuel. The name means God heard. Every single time someone said his name, they were saying, this is a child born from a prayer that was answered. Every time she called him in from the field, every time she held him, every time a neighbor asked his name, the answer was a testimony. God heard. And then Hannah did the thing that no one talks about. When Samuel was weaned, somewhere around 2 or 3 years old, she brought him to the temple, not for a visit, not for a blessing, to leave him there. She stood before Eli and said, I am the woman who stood here praying. This is the child I prayed for. The Lord granted my petition, so I am returning him to the Lord for as long as he lives. She kept the vow. The child she had wept for, bargained for, stopped eating over. She placed his hand in the hand of the priest and walked away. The text records no cry of anguish at the parting, no collapse, no second guessing. What the text does record is this: she worshiped, right there, after she gave him back. She lifted her voice and worshiped. And then, in a detail most people have never noticed, God gave her more. 1 Samuel 2:21 says the Lord visited Hannah, and she conceived and bore 3 more sons and 2 daughters. The woman who could not have 1 child had 6. The woman who gave back what she had prayed for received 5 times more in return. What you release in faith, God does not waste. Step back now. The years of silence, the humiliation from a woman who lived in the same house, the grief that lived in her body with no medical category and no cultural defense, the prayer so raw she couldn't say it out loud, the priest who called her drunk, the peace that came before the answer, the vows she kept when it would have been easier to hold on, and then the 5 children she never asked for, given back by the God who was watching the whole time. And Samuel, the boy she returned. He grew up in that temple. He became the prophet who heard God's voice as a child when no one else did. He anointed Saul, the first king of Israel. And then he anointed David, the king from whose line, 1,000 years later, Jesus was born. What started as one woman's silent tears in a doorway became the hinge point of an entire nation's history. Because she brought it honestly, because she kept her word, because she released what she loved most. Here is the quiet truth. If you have ever prayed the same prayer so many times, you lost count. If you have ever been misread in your lowest moment by someone who should have known better. If you have ever felt the specific loneliness of carrying something no one around you fully understood, you are closer to Hannah than you think. She was not a symbol. She was not a lesson plan. She was a woman with a body that ached, and a household that wore her down, and a God who heard every word she could not say out loud. And she kept going. Every silent, exhausted, faithful day of it. If this changed how you see Hannah's story, share it with someone who is still in the waiting. Subscribe if you want to keep walking through the stories no one tells you the real way. Drop in the comments. What hit you hardest? The years of silence? Eli calling her drunk? The moment she gave Samuel back? I read every one. See you in the next one.